We have a clearly established problem here: the perception of local food production. Viable urban green spaces with the potential for agricultural purposes exist all around us. This begs the question, why is urban food production given chronically low visibility?
The answer is surprisingly simple. Consumer culture makes it easy to forget that we're completely disconnected from the means of production. This is something to be concerned about because urban food production is not just a local nutritional source. It is also a way to promote incorporation of fresh greenery into our urban spaces whilst gaining a sense of community and self-reliance, something our local supermarkets cannot accomplish.
We're often told stories that we are consumers. And so I think that's one of those things that comes up is when we're told we're consumers, we respond in ways as consumers. So my power as a person is as a consumer, and the change I can make is as a consumer. So I often think about, okay, how can I change my consumption practices? How can I change some of my consuming activities to be more socially just?
How long has this perception of the exclusion of urban food production gone on? It seems as though this perception of the location of food production has maintained well into the 21st century and has defined our cities currently. So how can we change this perception?
I think farming has been traditionally associated as being a rural pursuit. People in cities eat it, people in the country grow it. I think historically food growth was a bigger part of the urban landscape, and then that changed over time. And we're coming full circle. We see the proliferation of community gardens. We see more experimental type farming happening, such as spin farming in the city. So I think it's going to take some time, but I think we understand that you can grow food intensely in small areas, and as more and more people do that, I think those perceptions will change along with it.
I don't think there's a very good understanding of food production. I think there's a lot of interest in food, evidenced by the increase in people buying organic, buying fair trade, the interest in vegetarianism, veganism, and also any kind of food that has sort of ethical behavior and local production. But food production, I think there's still this sort of myth of the farmer, even though farmers are only something like 2% of the occupational working population.
We must reverse our perceptions of food production. We need to debunk the myths that agriculture belongs only in rural spaces. It's time to shift this perception and emphasize that food production belongs in both our urban and rural landscapes. To fight the perception that food production belongs only in the rural landscape and not the cityscape, we have to take small steps. Nothing happens overnight. The more people who see food is being produced in cities, the more this will become the norm. This is why we're focusing on the U of A campus, where we can provide community socialization and individual empowerment through implementing small-scale gardens across campus. Together, we, one group of 6 scholars at the university, are implementing a garden for food production in the Lougheed Hall courtyard.
In my opinion, our perceptions of food production lack in a couple of critical areas. So first off, there's a disconnect between food production and then its eventual consumption. The things we eat are really devoid of story and of community. There is a sense of ownership and fellowship that comes with knowing where your food is grown. Just picking a bunch of bananas off a shelf or placing your order at L'Express denies us many of those opportunities for connection.
Most of the food I consume comes from on-campus vendors or the close-by grocery stores.
Probably, from the grocery store.
I don't know, I've never really even thought about it a lot.
So I knew all my vegetables were coming from Edmonton, but now I'm pretty aware that it'd be coming from all around the world. Absolutely, yes. There's lots of spaces. Actually, an interesting project that I did with the city of Edmonton was look at lots that had just been vacant and were zoned as public utility. And so those lots, since they're not usually used, they're just either pipeline right of way or something. The city is just loaning them or leasing them out to people for free for them to use. So, yeah.
I actually had previously volunteered for the campus garden, and it was actually one of the great ways to build more network and hear more about different opportunities that's there for us to do.
I'd definitely be interested in getting it from that.
I think definitely getting my food from those places, since I live so close to campus, it'd be pretty easy.
I did not.
Yes, I know there's lots on South Campus, but I don't know if there are any on North Campus.
I know we have South Campus that has a lot of like farm space and everything. I'm not sure exactly what they do with it or if it is all used up right now.
But what students don't know about that is that there are gardens and green spaces accessible to them right on North Campus. The Education, Biological Science, and Agriculture and Forestry buildings, as well as the Edmonton Clinic Health Academy, all feature rooftop greenhouses. The community garden at Campus Saint-Jean utilizes organic waste from student residences as organic fertilizer in their vegetable and herb production. All of these sustainable community spaces are available on campus to start fighting rural and industrial-based understandings of food production, and students are eager and willing to utilize these types of resources. But there's still a disconnect between the potential execution and student understanding. As abundant as these resources are, these spaces are neither easily accessible nor visible to students, and so they just remain unheard of. If we want to really challenge our current understandings of food perception, we need to start utilizing more and more visible urban plots. Doing so will allow us to not only live more sustainably, but will allow us to build a greater community.
I do think, though, food production more visibly seen across campus would get people thinking about how we could use land, small plots of land, more cleverly to produce food, which many people in the world do.
So I think the more success you have growing food, the more people that are involved and the more you kind of draw on the expertise of existing resources in the university, that would be really helpful in changing perception.
Community is really about lives coming together. And if we can think about that program as lives coming together, then that's a really big part of it. And so I think that's really where that essence of community has been there, is that we care about the people there. And we don't just care about the outcome of whatever this project is about.
So my experience is pretty rich. I've gone from being part of community gardens and watching, people from different generations and different traditions sort of work together around the common purpose of growing food, harvesting that food, preparing that food, and eating that food. That whole sort of value chain of human joy is a pretty wonderful thing to experience.
So when I go into a garden, I think about my grandma. I think about my dad. I think about the garden we had in our backyard at my grandma's house. I think about beets and carrots and Swiss chard and those things. And those connect me to my practices. So I think of myself in that way when I step into it.
The University of Alberta is home to 9 unique residences, and plenty of them have green spaces. Behind me here is the Peter Lougheed Hall courtyard, which has a huge green space. There are places for students to sit and lots of empty grass. The problem with this, while it's very aesthetic and looks beautiful, is that it doesn't provide a function. We're looking at providing something that is functional and still beautiful for students at Peter Lougheed Hall. While there's a space for storing snow, there's also potential during the summer months for this place to function and provide food for the students, residents, and scholars of Peter Lougheed Hall.
The university is a great place to do it because you have sort of at your fingertips a wealth of knowledge about food science. And
as we've mentioned in our podcast, there are lots of benefits to having community gardens. There are the sustainability and economic benefits, but there are also the social and very human benefits that gardens offer. We are proposing a garden in the Peter Lougheed Hall courtyard where students can experience these social benefits. If you'd like to join us in creating this initiative and contributing to the quality of students' lives, please sign up on the Google Doc that we have available, and we'll welcome your participation.